Okay, this is a planning committee meeting. Today is Thursday, July 17th. I'll call the meeting to order at 2 p.m. Clerk, could you please start us off with a roll call?
Councilmember Hotchkiss,
Present.
Councilmember Kavanaugh,
Present.
Chair Rathmel,
Present.
Councilmember Middleton is here in an ex officio capacity, and thank you, Mayor Craig, for joining us.
Okay, so today's agenda will cover RL 25-117, an ordinance to adjust our 2025 budget for Binghamton Plaza escrow. We have several categories of questions, but I think it may make the most sense to start with legal aspects. I understand Corp Counsel was not here. I'm assuming that you've asked similar questions and have answers, but if you don't, he's confirmed that we can send them to him in writing. So we'll still cover them. Legal aspects of the eminent domain proceedings to represent where we currently are, and then likely a discussion of the overall timeline and anticipated costs, which I imagine will also include aspects of the environmental assessment, site management, post-acquisition, et cetera. Any issues with kind of that broad stroke approach to the conversation? Okay, so for a little bit of context, and Mayor, please jump in to correct me if I'm wrong with this timeline. So council approved in May 2023, council approved taking the Binghamton Plaza property via eminent domain.
Yes.
The owner appealed in April 2024, but the state ruled in favor of the city in June of 2024. My first question relative to that timeline and where we're at currently is why it took a year after the court ruled in favor of the city to issue a purchase offer.
A couple different things. So we got the court's ruling, and it was, I'm not sure what the exact date was. I think it was the summer of 2024. And that kind of kicked off the next phase of what we needed to do to not just have a drive-by assessment done of the property, but a very in-depth appraisal. There were delays in getting documentation from the property owner on certain aspects of the financials. In addition to those delays, there was substantial appraisal work that had to be done. It's quite a large property. And the condition of the property necessitated that the appraiser contract with an engineering company to give a little bit more information about some of the civil engineering deficiencies of the plaza for just a portion of it, which affected the valuation. So having that analysis done was effective at achieving what is, a true and from the city standpoint, value that works for our EDPL.
The appraisal identified inspections occurring between May and July of last year, but it did note that there were several suites that weren't accessible or available for inspection. Could you speak to that accessibility or the availability for inspection?
I'm not aware of the intricacies of that.
Okay. Were there in those inspection processes or leading up to this in any capacity, were there attempts to work with the plaza owners on improvements before court action was pursued?
Upon, really shortly after I became mayor, I reached out to the plaza owners and just to kind of say, look, we've had this property in terrible condition for my entire lifetime. There appears to be less and less movement on doing anything. Can we partner on something? Can the city purchase the property? Those discussions did not go anywhere. And based on, again, the last 30 years of kind of knowing what was going on, as well as a bankruptcy proceeding or bankruptcy protection that was preventing them from paying real property taxes. And also the fact that when they fought their taxes not too many years ago, they said the property was worth nothing, a $0 value. I believe that eminent domain was going to be the city's best option. And so once we engage in that process, we had to speak through attorneys and kind of the legal means of it all.
Are you aware whether the owners of the plaza still have any avenue for appeal?
I'm not aware. No, the appellate division and was their appeal, and they did not send legal representation to that in-person hearing in front of the appellate division.
Okay.
So
Go
I
ahead.
think not appeal, but when after you make the offer, there's still the opportunity for them to argue that it's not a fair value. So it's just like legal timeline. There's no appeal is off the table as far as we know. But there could still be back and forth around the appraised value or the offer.
Yeah, and again, don't want to provide legal advice, but my understanding is that either it could be accepted as is, accepted with conditions, or rejected. And those are kind of the three options. And then each one of them has a different kind of path forward. Probably the latter two involving some level of judicial intervention or direction.
How much has the city spent to date on legal fees related to the eminent domain proceeding?
It's over 300,000. I don't have an exact figure.
Okay. Do you anticipate additional legal expenses moving forward?
I would say that the lion's share of the costs have been already spent. There will be other costs associated with it, I'm sure, but not to the extent of preparing the eminent domain process and then also the litigation, taking it to the appellate division. It's not $1 million in legal expenses.
Are you comfortable putting an estimated cost on what might remain?
I wouldn't know, but
Okay.
Certainly, I mean, year to date represents a small fraction of that, a little bit more than 300,000.
Okay. But so we talked timeline somewhat once the current owners accept. So assuming it's accepted or the city is moving forward with taking the property, what is the projected timeline for, and I think I'll just ask each and then pause. So projected timeline for closing.
Again, an attorney would be able to better answer this exactly, but in eminent domain proceeding law, there is something called vesting of title, which is not the same as like a typical closing, but it essentially means that the city or the entity doing eminent domain has authority over the property. If I wanted to paint it purple, we could, that type of thing. But again, it's what those technical legal descriptions of that versus a closing, I'm not.
That's okay. As far as the legal description, do you have a timeline that you might be able to project?
It's 90 days from the official issuance of the letter. As was discussed, we tried an informal route to again save everyone some legal fees, which was not responded to.
Okay. And would the closing or vesting be somewhat synonymous with the city gaining possession?
Yes.
Okay. From there, timeline for beginning demolition or remediation.
Say that again.
And I would imagine this is anticipated, but a projected timeline for beginning demolition or remediation post gaining possession.
It's difficult to say, but we would try to make it as quickly as possible. There are a lot of different ways to do it. Obviously, demolition of the structure is significant and will be done over the course of a period of time. So if demolition starts, it may be in phases, which depending on what the contractor is looking to do. But we do not have an interest in keeping the property, as it is in the current condition.
Okay.
But I'm sorry, but it's not gonna sit. You plan on doing the demo. You said you don't know the time date, but it's not gonna sit around for a while. Well, correct?
That's correct. I mean, I imagine that there will be just practical things dealing with things like electric service or other things that are outside the city's control that often delay demolitions. But yeah, the goal here is we budgeted the money, council's approved the money, and so we have that kind of ready to go. The other thing too is, demo also includes abatement. So, abatement of different aspects of the building from asbestos, have to happen in areas that have not been condemned or are dangerous to remediate. So the demolition crews being on site doing abatement would happen before actual excavators start to tear down visibly the buildings.
We definitely have a bulk of questions related to demolition, abatement, starting with the environmental assessment that was initially completed for this project. So, and again, folks, I know I'm just going through questions, but feel free to jump in. That environmental assessment that was completed in April 2024, 3? Question mark. It was prior to council's approval, so it would have been April 2023, completed by the planning department, signed off by then former city council president Giovanni Scaringi. It identifies an expansion of Sherry Lindsay Park for just over 2 acres and enhanced access to the Riverwalk and site and infrastructure improvements for an undetermined productive use as the proposed redevelopment plan at that time, again, April 2023 for the plaza. Is that still your plan for the site?
Yeah, the public use of the site really has 4 key categories. It's removal of the blighted buildings. It's improved access to the riverfront for the public. Any expansion of park space from Sherry Lindsay Park, which probably will marry with improved riverfront access, and then the availability for commercial or housing development closer to the West State Street corridor to make it more walkable for Northside residents and have a productive use. So it's kind of those 4 main aspects. We have to clear the blight. We have to reopen public access to the Shenango riverfront and enhance park space. But an important part of this is have commercial development on, basically the eastern side and close to the road for the plaza, for the site.
Mm-hmm. Is the city planning to prepare and redevelop the site itself, or are we investing in the cleanup and site preparation with the intention of selling to private developers?
So there is no cleanup that's required in the site. This site has been part of the brownfield cleanup program, and remediation was completed in 2014. So as far as the DEC is concerned, the site has a very, very similar outlook as the Canal Plaza site has at 435 State Street, where in order for development to happen, there's no additional remediation. You need to have 2 feet of clean fill in any areas where there will be grass, but otherwise buildings or a hard surface can serve as a cap. And the only real use that's prohibited is single family home construction, but multi-unit residential, commercial, everything can happen at that site. So, but from the city standpoint, eminent domain and demolition of the blighted buildings is what we currently have funding for. What fulfills, I think, a major strategic win for the city. And we, there's some things that may be, non-public as of right now that better discuss in executive session in terms of grant monies that are available to the city that will help guide redevelopment for the plaza. But this is going to be a long process, no doubt about it. But getting the property and getting the blight cleared is going to be a huge part of that. And that's what the current kind of scope is and where we have very actionable next steps.
And oh, go ahead. No, go on. I know you hear this often, but have you had a moment to speak with the people over there, like the owner, the shops and everything over there? Is there a plan for the current people that rent out the spaces?
Yeah, so we have been in contact with many. Again, potentially in executive session, I can go into a little bit more detail about some of that information and regarding legal advice that we received as part of this process. But the city stands ready to help any business to relocate, to find incentives. As I said, the businesses that are located there don't deserve the conditions, just like the north side.
So we actually have a bulk of questions relative to the transition to that communication as well. But before we jump to that, could you, and I mentioned this in the previous question, but has the city had any conversations with private developers about the site?
No.
Okay.
To go back about timeline for, can't remember who brought it up, but it's just like it's going to be a long project. I am guessing that there's probably not going to be a groundbreaking ceremony. Like that would be like 5 years out at best. Is that kind of how your reading of the whole project as a whole stands?
For like a new development?
Yeah.
No, I think it can be accomplished in a lot less time. The other thing too is that I think that it's a conversation that should be had with council. I mean, the city will own this, and so the sale of any property or the subdividing of any property needs council's consent. Sure, there are multiple different strategies. Do you have one entity that once the public space that we want is identified and maybe subdivided from the parcel, there's one entity that wants to take, say, all of the remaining acreage, 20 acres or 15 acres, and do certain developments and have a plan? Or does the city want to explore having small developers or small projects that exist on the site that we can do a few acres at a time to have development happen? And so something like that could happen in very, very much the short term. If someone upon the city, receiving ownership wanted to buy 2 acres right near the road, and it was a productive use that council, mayor's office agreed on, that could be advanced very quickly.
I think I've brought this up with you before. If not, it's on top of my mind, but I have like skepticism about the appetite for redevelopment. And I think it can be pretty well demonstrated by the 2.5 acres that's owned by the BLDC that's just right across the street from the Binghamton Plaza that has, I mean, I think maybe at one point it was considered for part of the Canal Plaza. But if that is kind of representative of the appetite for redevelopment on the north side, right in that neighborhood, then I think it's not a strong sign that there's going to be people lining up to build.
Councilman Kavanaugh, do you want to fill Councilman Hutchinson on BLDC presentation we had last month? There's a developer interested in a $40+ million affordable housing and supportive housing project on that site, following up with a state RFP that was issued and was awarded for Broome County. I'm supportive of that. The BLEC is looking to advance that. And one of the reasons that they're interested in that site is because of what happened with Canal Plaza and because of the opportunities for kind of redevelopment of that entire corridor across the street.
It's not the only site they're looking at, right? But they're looking at a site in Broome County and hopefully in Binghamton, correct?
I believe that it's really the only site that is feasible. They haven't signed the paperwork to do it and are entering into an option agreement to do environmental review. But aside from that, if you asked me that a year ago, it would have maybe had a different answer. But there is, active development interest in that BLDC site, and a company that's willing to put up some dollars to do an option agreement.
So you mentioned,
Go ahead.
are you sure? That particular group pursuing environmental review, if we consider again the environmental assessment from 2023, so a negative declaration under seeker was issued by the planning department and the former city council in 2023, but there are known environmental issues that were identified. Can you explain how that determination was made?
I did not do the seeker. I'm not an expert in seeker. What our multiple conversations with the DEC is basically as followed: is that this property, while it was derelict in many other avenues, was by the book with its brownfield cleanup program. And so the site has been remediated. What we're looking to do, whether it's on demolition or further development, are not any sort of environmental hurdles beyond, actually potentially less than what Canal Plaza had to deal with. To build on the site will require likely the use of piles because of the soil conditions and it being near the river and its former use. But none of that really has to do with environmental. The city's not obtaining a largely contaminated site that no one can use until we remediate it at the tune of millions of dollars. We just have to cap what we need to, and development can happen unencumbered.
So ultimately DEC approved the determination.
I'm not sure if DEC would have approved the EAF, but DEC, we've been in constant contact with them throughout this process. They presented at one of our webinars on the plaza, and have provided us a lot of info about what can and can't happen at the site.
Okay. Are there risks that have been discussed, whether it's future litigation or environmental enforcement actions that stem from the negative declaration?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Are we at all exposing the city to liability by making a negative declaration if there were environmental issues identified in the assessment?
I'm not sure. I just know that the environmental assessment was one of the things that was challenged as part of the appellate process, and the appellate division found that our EAF was sufficient, that we checked all the boxes, and that it was applicable as part of eminent domain.
Okay. There are a number of things in terms of probably starting with contaminated material also identified in the assessment that I want to ask about, but any lingering thoughts or questions from others before I keep going? Okay. So the assessment identifies contaminated material being removed or remediated. The estimate is 640,000 tons of contaminated material. Do we have an estimated cost for that removal?
So the EAF, what was presented, I believe, and again, I think a question for Corporation Counsel or the planning department, but that encompasses, all of the possible potential that would be needed upon further discussion with the DEC. That's not something that has to happen. Just as, we have included in here the expansion of park space and public access. When we take over the property, we do not have a site plan for public access. We do not have a planning document for park space, but it was something that was covered as part of this phase of the EAF. The one thing that we did not do is we did not, try to include all future development, right? That will have to go through a separate seeker process. Sale of city property, I believe, requires seeker. So we met everything we needed from an environmental standpoint in doing the EDPL, and we'll work side by side with DEC on whatever is needed. But from our conversations, there is no remediation in order to advance development.
Okay, so we don't have estimates of anticipated costs, understanding that the future conversations were saved for future discussion. This purchase will come from the escrow, the adjustment to the budget that'll come from the general fund. What funding sources have been identified to cover those future anticipated costs?
What type of future anticipated costs?
I understood what you were just saying in response to mean that anything anticipated in terms of redevelopment post-acquisition was reserved for future
park space
discussion.
Okay. So there's a number of different things. Again, can talk a little bit more about some pending grant applications that the city has at some point, but so I think the options are open. So when the city eventually redevelops and starts to sell off the commercial parts of this real estate, we will be able to recoup the eminent domain costs that we're providing. That's something that's really important. It would be a no-brainer for the city to sell off these parcels once the building is down. And then as it relates to expansion of Sherry Lindsay or the riverfront, absolutely there needs to be a planning document from both an initial study and then eventually construction drawings for what that looks like. And I would imagine the city would either bond for those improvements or chase after available economic development parks resources. We could, I would love nothing more than to have the biggest skate park in upstate New York, right? Because we have the existing skate park, but we'd have to look at costs on that and use and everything else. It can go in a lot of different directions.
Okay, so I think that kind of transitions into post-possession site management questions. Are we okay to move into that? Okay. Yes?
I guess there's I understand what you're saying, but then about the remediation is already complete. So if a developer comes in and they need to dig, it's fine. There's no future challenges facing them as long as they're driving piles through whatever is on the site.
Yeah. So what the DEC described is that it's very, very similar, if not exactly similar, to Canal Plaza, that you can have development that happens. The future uses have to either be capped by 2 feet of clean fill if it's grass, or hardscape or buildings. It's really about capping the ground in terms of continuing the compliance of the brownfield cleanup. So, of course, during development, as the Canal Plaza developers did, there is a design and engineers that say this is how you have to construct the building to be in compliance with whether it's this site or really any site in the city, any type of groundwater or environmental concerns. And so they design a project that meets those laws and regulations.
So the developer would be responsible for any capping.
Yeah, so this has to relate to, again, future uses. And so right now there is a large parking lot that is capping a lot of it. And so we're going to have to determine what the costs look like for removal of that versus, with 2 feet of clean fill. Is it strategic from a future development standpoint to leave portions of that, or is it strategic to remove all of it? It's balancing the needs of blight reduction and getting the site shovel ready with the costs. But any sort of future development, if the city was doing development along the flood wall and expansion of Sherry Lindsay Park, engineers would design any sort of construction that meets the environmental requirements the same way that we would if we're building a fire station not on this parcel. If a private developer is buying land from the city of Binghamton and developing, they would be responsible for following all of the environmental regulations. But there's nothing inherent with the site right now that would prohibit development because remediation is needed. And that I just want to, make very clear.
And just to make sure I understand relative to the parking lot, when you said we'd have to determine in terms of what's practical, by we, you mean the city?
Yes.
Okay. And though the answer to that question in terms of what future decision will determine practicality or feasibility, do we have any sense or do we have an understanding of what addressing the parking lot would look like and how much that would cost?
So the key questions are, is it, if you remove it and bringing in the 2 feet of clean fill, can it be phased? Prohibiting public access, I think, would be important in the short terms in terms of vehicular access. We don't want to have something that is another parking lot for abandoned vehicles, that type of thing. So these are kind of small but practical questions that will come up that we'll work with demolition contractors and engineers on determining kind of what the best course of action is.
Anything else on those pieces? I think there are some additional questions, but I want to make sure to leave room for a few other categories. So in terms of site management, who will manage the property once the city gains possession? I think my sub questions to that would be, will management be handled by a city department, or will the city contract with a private property management company?
I don't think that's been finalized. I think there are things that the city can do in terms of things like snow plowing. The more quickly the building comes down, the less maintenance that we have to do. Also too, I think, again, from a practical standpoint, getting solid demolition numbers for the plaza and understanding what a timeline would look like. Much of the plaza is vacant, and obviously it's split up into kind of standalone areas. So are there ways to have abatement and demolition happen while businesses can continue to operate? That's something that I think should be explored. That gets into utilities and other questions that really a demolition company and looking at it would have to determine what is safe and what is feasible.
Do we know what the annual cost of maintaining the property is anticipated to be?
Once the buildings are down, we're talking about basically lawn mowing, essentially, and not too much maintenance beyond that. It wouldn't be used, and so it wouldn't become something that would have to be plowed or anything like that.
Do we know what the utility, so prior to it coming down, do we know what the anticipated utility costs would be, or even an annual number?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but we do have utility information.
I think I want to switch a little bit to the business transition, since we're getting somewhat into when it comes down, how much of it comes down, what the phases are. So and you mentioned this earlier, as far as the city's support for small businesses that are currently operating in the plaza, we've approximated 64 jobs currently tied to tenants in the plaza. Could you talk through whether existing tenants will be allowed to remain in place, under what conditions, what notices have been provided, et cetera?
A lot of that conversation has to do with legal advice that we've received, and I'd be happy to go into detail on that in executive session.
Okay, you mentioned relocation assistance potentially being made available for tenants who are displaced. Has the city identified any potential alternative locations for businesses that may be displaced so they can retain their business within the city?
Yes.
Do you have a plan for engaging the employees who were impacted? As far as information about timing, job transition support?
Again, that has to do with legal advice that we received from our counsel on how the city should engage or not engage in those sort of things, which again, I'd be happy to answer.
I think you touched on this, but just to make sure I'm asking it in the way that we were considering it, is there any plan to phase redevelopment in a way that allows some businesses to remain while others relocate? Was that also under the executive session?
I just think generally, if there is a way to abate and demolish the building, which will certainly take time, we would look to maximize the amount of time that businesses can continue to operate if they wish, if it's still safe to do so. There are so many large areas of that which are vacant, huge amounts of square footage that I could see conceptually that happening. Whether that's practical with the demolition company, I don't know.
So we've talked about environmental assessment. Is there a protocol for conducting an economic impact assessment for loss of jobs or sales tax revenue during the transition period?
Not that was contemplated as part of the eminent domain procedure law. I do know that because of the city enacting this, we gained hundreds of thousands of dollars in property taxes that the plaza owner was not paying.
The job piece of this is really, I think it's close to home to me because I know that there's like my neighbors have jobs in the plaza and they rely on them for their livelihood, of course. And I know that I have a certain degree of confidence that you or the economic development would, if you could get 60 jobs to come to the city, you'd probably bend over backwards to make that happen. So I've expressed this to you before, but I think those jobs are extremely important and precious, and they should be preserved. Every effort should be made to preserve them while this is happening, because there's very few resources on the north side in particular, and it's very sensitive to me. So
I appreciate that, Councilman, and I think that conversation, I can get into a lot more granular detail in executive session about specifics and specific businesses and specific job numbers. I would say just a broad comment is that the condition of this plaza and how it has have negatively affected the north side for really decades now. At some point the city has to take stock of, yes, there are existing businesses, and we'll help out all of those businesses to stay within the city and even stay within the north side to the extent possible. And I think that the actual impacts will be much lower than the job number that you spoke about that we would ever actually lose. But the fact that the plaza has stayed as it is, when we actually think about what jobs would potentially be impacted, I think that there is a enormous upside in the jobs that could be created through the redevelopment of that site, and also the quality of life improvement for residents of the north side. That is not anything that I have statistics to back up, but in talking to neighbors and talking to the North Side Neighborhood Assembly and just knowing what the impact of that has been and how it has defined an entire neighborhood, the city's namesake plaza, I think the opportunities at the site are immense. And then when we look at the net of jobs 5-10 years from now, that number will be a lot greater. The other thing too is that there's no alternate plan. The plaza owners have not ever put forward any type of improvement plan. The building has continued to fall apart. There's no other idea for what the plaza would be, and has not been for a long, long period of time. There are less jobs today in that plaza than there were 20 years ago. And I wonder to what extent the lack of investment in the plaza has had a lot to do with that.
Could you speak to why a full demolition is essentially the only option being considered instead of reinvestment or partial renovation?
Due to the condition of the buildings themselves, and also where the building is on the site. It's not walkable. It's not conducive to a density and a complete streets style of neighborhood redevelopment.
And without getting into specifics in terms of, so you answered yes to identifying potential alternative locations and being in some discussions with the businesses in order to retain them within the city of Binghamton. Is there also has there been discussion or a strategy to re-engage any displaced businesses once redevelopment is complete?
Sure. Not something that has been, again, concrete, but if there is a future commercial development or space or a mixed use building and a business that was formerly located at the Binghamton Plaza, I think would be a great fit for that new space. There's also available commercial spaces on the north side that could fit those businesses as well.
You mentioned looking at 5 to 10 years, 20 years back. If you were to conceptualize 5 to 10 years forward, what would your measure for this site transfer and ultimately the redevelopment? What would your measure for success be?
I think that the city has succeeded even to date, right, by getting that bankruptcy protection removed, right? Without that, we're talking about major dollars that city, county, and school district did not have. Eliminating the blight of this plaza and the negative effect that has on the surrounding community. I look at what's happening at the Stowe site, and the removal of those blighted buildings are engaging development community, local officials, statewide officials into having investment and planning and pre-development thought about for that site as well. And the same thing will happen here in the Binghamton Plaza. So I think that getting the plaza demolished, ridding the north side of that blight is a huge win. I think if we're talking in the 5 to 10 year period, having a new and attractive waterfront access for the public that connects to Sherry Lindsay Park and is accessible from the commercial corridor would be part of it. And then any type of expansion for the park, I think could be accomplished in the next decade. And the start of some substantial commercial development that's close to West State Street. Again, 5 to 10 years is not too aggressive of a plan for that.
To bounce off your mention of the waterway, to go back some to the environmental assessment, One of the concerns identified was the impact to the brook floater. So a threatened species, freshwater species impacted by the demolition. Are you familiar with the brook floater, what it means for waterways and habitats and how the project could impact
Was that identified in the EAF?
the environmental assessment?
Okay. Do you know on which page?
I can pull it quickly. Should be under plants, impact on plants and animals. No, no. Feel free to ask other questions while I find
I would say
them.
generally as it relates to that, whether it be long-eared bats or a specific species, obviously the state has concerns about any impacts. But the appellate division affirmed that this environmental review was sufficient for the stated purpose of the plaza. So I wouldn't have any concerns of impacts to plants or animals.
Okay, so just to reflect, in the summary report, it is E2O as far as answered yes to endangered or threatened species with brook floater identified. So that's page 2 of the summary report. Just before we get to pages 1 to 10 of the full environmental. Okay. I know I did a bulk of the asking. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Discussion regarding next steps?
Well, I think based on a number of the questions, there's things that need to be discussed and kind of reviewed in executive session it's a significant chunk of concern. So I think we either need to do that or schedule a time to do that. I don't know if there's a value in corporation counsel present for chunks of that. I think we touched on some legal aspects. I'm certainly not an expert on the environmental pieces of this other than relying on the fact that this has gone essentially through an entire lawsuit already up to the appellate division as far as the environmental review and having the very similar situation at Canal Plazas. But I don't know if we want to pull in city engineer or somebody from the state that might want to speak to those specific concerns as well.
Mhm.
I'm sure the DEC would be happy to relay the information they have, which is the information they provided me on, exactly what was here. I think at the bottom line is that this specific brownfield is not one to be scared of, right? That it's been through the cleanup process, it's been remediated, and that the state is looking to even incentivize development of brownfields just like this all across the state. It was a really successful story with Canal Plaza. These are the types of places that we should be looking at for development. And there is not a huge heavy lift to allow for development to happen there. And I think the general public sentiment for many, many years is that that was the case, that no one wants to get involved in this because of significant environmental concerns, and in investigation and talks with the DEC, it's not anything that you want to just say, we're not aware of brownfields, or we're not aware, we want to turn a blind eye to any sort of environmental stuff, but this is manageable, very doable, and right across the street you have a tens of millions of dollar investment that did just that, and it's providing affordable housing, a grocery store, and other office space. It can be replicated just the same at the Binghamton Plaza site.
I think I had a couple, my, at the end of the day, this is, we're using taxpayer money to purchase this. And I'm sure anyone who is skeptical or conservative, fiscally conservative, would want to have some type of appreciation for when or what will the return on investment be for this spending. And I was hoping you could speak to that, because I think it's probably a difficult question to answer, but it's we're shelling out a good amount of cash to acquire it, to do all the legal process and demolish this, and I don't personally see the opportunity to recoup where we're investing this money. But if there's a vision that you have for how that happens, or is it in the sale of parcels? Is it the future sales tax revenue from businesses that might come in new developments?
I think at the simplest, obviously, is when the sale of parcels happens, that will significantly recoup the money that was spent on the process of eminent domain and then the actual purchase price itself. We don't have an option to pay less, right? This is eminent domain procedure law is long established, and this is what we have to do. But I think that the ancillary community and economic development opportunities here are outstanding. Think about, we spend $1.5 million to rebuild a certain road in the city of Binghamton. What is the visual or return on investment that we have there? And versus 1.55 million to initiate, certainly we're spending more on demolition, but to initiate a comprehensive change to the status quo for the most unsightly large property that we have, probably in Broome County, that you can see from the highway. The Town and Country redevelopment team has spoken about the fact that the city's playing an active role in getting the Binghamton Plaza cleaned up is one of the things that gives them confidence. As I mentioned, the BLDC and those developers look at the north side being a place that is worthy of investment. We have that being invested in. We have MHAS soon making investments in the former CVS. We're going to be building a new fire station somewhere on the north side. So all of these public investments will help enhance, I think, that commercial corridor, which has a ton of potential. It's right next to two major highways. It's very, very close to downtown. And so someone that I don't always agree with, but I think he's a smart person. At one point, this was many years ago, gave the advice that if someone like the city doesn't step up to take care of properties like this, or demolish, blight, or tackle certain neighborhood issues, there's no B team, right? There's no other entity that's going to have the passion or the drive to fix something. And certainly if we leave it to the private sector, they're going to put profits ahead of people. The owners of this plaza don't live in Binghamton. Clearly from the condition, they have not cared about this parcel for a long, long, long period of time. And so to me, it's important that we move forward, and that clearing the site I think is a huge economic development opportunity for the north side of the city of Binghamton. And there already is interest in that area. And as we move closer and get these buildings down, just like at Stowe, there will be continued interest as well.
I think I'm still hoping to walk away with and I'm realizing I don't have the actual answer to this question. So we've got 1.55 for purchase. And do we have cost for development? Or I'm sorry, demolition?
Yes, roughly 2 million. And that was budgeted for in the 2025 budget and is approved and ready to spend as soon as we can.
And to reiterate again, those are the only anticipated costs.
At this phase of our the process to redevelop the Binghamton Plaza, those are the major ones, yes. And I can't think of any that would be, any sort of capital type investment that would be required.
The parking lot is an unknown.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly so there's no cost of leaving it like it is as a cap. But I think that adds, frankly, to the blight of the plaza as well, the heaving asphalt. We'll have to see. I mean, one of the other aspects of this is that needs to be remediated. Remediation or surveys will determine what the potential remediation cost is, and ultimately has to be public bid with prevailing wage. And so what those bids are not going to be known, but in talking to demolition companies, that was the best gauge that they could give on what the demolition cost would be.
I would imagine this becomes a question for executive session based on what you've presented. But if we're anticipating grants, as you've mentioned, has there been consideration, just given the federal fiscal climate, of a contingency plan if the external funding dries up or those grants are not available?
The grants are not federal grants, so I wouldn't think it would be impacted really in any way there. There are also, just generally speaking, on eminent domain, certain restrictions of federal money being put into eminent domain projects. So having a depending on the phase of where these things are, having federal money, let's say, pay for acquisition or demolition was never something that I considered.
Okay, and we don't have, so we have the acquisition costs, we have an estimated legal costs, which you said currently at about 300,000, anticipated another 300,000.
No. Currently a little bit more than 300,000, but not hundreds of thousands of dollars more.
Okay, so we have acquisition at 1.5, we have legal costs somewhere between 3 and 500K estimated. We have demolition at 2 million. We don't anticipate additional environmental cleanup. I don't know what the actual definition for cleanup is, but I'm going to use air quotes.
Like remediation, I think would be a more appropriate term.
Okay. Property management is a cost of property management, and how that will play out, you said, is still under consideration, as well as you have utility cost information prior to demolition.
I think we should take up the parking lot, plant grass, bring in some goats, and apply for an agricultural subsidy.
Did you say goats?
Yep.
Goats. Noted, Councilmember Kavanaugh. Okay, final question in that kind of lineup. No additional planning or engineering studies anticipated currently?
I believe there will be, but
To be done by the city that will cost the city.
hopefully we'll have grants to cover those.
Okay.
And I'm strongly believe we will.
Do you see a role for BLDC in taking on some of the pre-development costs and workload, or keeping it in the city proper, or we don't know yet?
I think that I would be surprised if council would want to relinquish the ownership to the BLDC. Maybe they do. Maybe I'm mistaken on that, but I would think that members of council would want it to remain in the city as to have a say in when and how it gets sold. If I'm mistaken, let me know. I think the BLDC does have probably some funding that can assist on pre-development. This is a regional and statewide priority for economic development. Our partners at Broome County, the agency, certainly the DEC, Empire State Development, Department of State, are all very invested in seeing this project happen. Invested in the sense of, I think they recognize its regional impact. So I think for pre-development activities, there will be a host of ways that we can leverage outside funding than us at a budget meeting coming and saying, hey, we need to budget 100,000 for a study for X, Y, and Z. This fits a lot of different categories. It's an environmental justice issue. It's a brownfield. It's a large strategic site. When this site, the reason why it's to me so impactful is that it is a regional asset that, if developed properly, could be bringing people into the southern tier, could be a really key riverfront development that, whether it's housing on the site or other uses, could help regional goals essentially.
I don't know that I've seen, and maybe I just haven't dug into the file of the eminent domain proceeding enough to understand, but I have not gotten a lot of indication of, say, love from county and state level on this particular project. I haven't seen that kind of publicly demonstrated as we did with let's just say the country town apartments, for example, things where people are coming out of the woodwork to kind of contribute and stuff. And that might be something I'm missing, or I don't know.
I would say that the state, specifically the DEC, has been outstanding. The commissioner was in town. The commissioner of the DEC was in town last week, a few hundred yards from the Binghamton Plaza. She is aware of this project. She offered, the full support of the state, and this is the state DEC commissioner. Our partners at the agency are very in support of seeing redevelopment. I encourage you to reach out to the county executive, who, again, understands. He's someone who used to represent the north side on the county legislature, about what this parcel could be. So they have been incredible. And then the other thing too is the webinar that we had representatives from the Department of State and DEC actively participating and talking about what their role is, how they can help on this. So probably with Town and Country, the fact that we were groundbreaking and everything, all of the work was done, was when you saw a lot of folks there. But the state has been great.
I'm realizing another answer that I'm not quite sure I have. But how long do you anticipate demolition will take?
I don't know, but given the size of the parcel, sometime. We're not talking, I don't think, a year or anything, but it depends on what the exact needs are.
But anticipated within that 2 million that was approved, and the demolition, to make sure I'm clear on the DEC review, demolition is not anticipated to disrupt or disturb the current cap. So additional remediation post demolition would not be.
That's correct. Or,
required.
That would have to be, the demolition contract would work with DEC to ensure that whatever happens either retains what is capping, or if that is removed, then the clean fill that replaces whatever hardscape that they're taking out. But buildings can count, hardscape can count, and if it's grass, that's where you need the 2 feet of clean fill.
Okay, so maybe some disturbance, but that remains to be seen.
Yes. But nothing that, again, would require large scale environmental remediation, trucks of toxic waste going through the north side, which was brought up publicly. It's just not true.
Speaking of North Side residents, is there a plan to, as you've mentioned, there has for a long time been the perception at the very least that contamination is a concern, that materials could be hazardous. Is there a plan to be in communication with North Side residents, provide the opportunity for feedback, but also inform them regarding the health concerns, answer questions about health concerns, et cetera?
Yes. Was anyone on the webinar that we did? You were on it. So that was a great opportunity. We will continue to have those. NGIT is planning on further a public outreach to kind of explain. I mean, both from a Brownfields 101 standpoint on what do they mean, what do they not mean, what are these specific sites. Yes, the answer is yes, and as much as we can put out that information, we will. We did press releases on it. I think we shared with council to get it out to networks. I've spoken to the Northside Neighborhood Assembly about the project, et cetera.
Okay, I'm aware that it is 3:15.
My only thing is that seems like the general fund is one of those things that we don't touch unless we absolutely have to. And it seems like this is it's not a typical expense or not a typical transfer. And I'm wondering if that's going to impact basically the city's, or how much that's going to impact the city's like financial standing. And I know there's still money in there, but it's like we're at a point where we're dipping into this fund that we don't really touch. It's like a rainy day fund that's
Yeah. So I think that, and look, I think everyone kind of recognizes is that the city doesn't or has not historically taken on things like this, right? That, I mean, I've been around more than 10 years. I'm not sure if there's anything like this before. I don't recall anything. But I felt that it was very, very important. And when council adopted this eminent domain and the fact that their adoption of it has gone through the appellate division, you know, we're at the point now where we have to fulfill that. We have to fulfill those requirements, and so that provides, you know, the cleanest way to have this in a special account. And then as we sell off property, if there's other ways that we can recoup this funding, it can return to the general fund. But it represents, you know, a major investment in the north side that I think the north side is deserving of.
For the unknown still relative to what could potentially be disrupted in demolition, do you know what protections exist for the city if additional contamination is found or there's site disturbance? Is that a perpetual liability that the city would be responsible for?
Well, anything that's done improperly by a contractor, obviously we have, you know, bonded and insurance for any contractor that's working on this site or any other city site if they do something improper that results in something environmental. So we have that as part of our contracts. It's insurance and bonded. There again, because the brownfield cleanup was completed and the aspects were remediated, the risk for that is not like it would be if it was a true, you know, starting from scratch brownfield cleanup. And that's, you know, all detailed in the DEC site plans for this. The property owner has stayed in compliance with the maintenance that's required on it.
Any additional questions? Anything lingering? I think. Well, yes. So in terms of, I do think executive session is appropriate, but I don't think we have everyone here that we would want to be involved in a closed conversation. I would anticipate scheduling a follow-up planning committee meeting that would enter into executive session where we're inviting Council Heary, potentially other members from the DC, or at least the opportunity to review comments from the DC. Does that feel appropriate? Okay. Okay, so TBD in terms of the next planning committee meeting to continue discussion.
What's our time frame for, do we have are we under a clock now or not until we actually issue the?
So there's some title work that has to happen, but when that's done, the clock will start, and that will be in a few weeks.
And that's 90 days.
Yes.
That's 90 days from, so the 90-day window I think I'm most familiar with is 90 days post formal offer, but the formal, and we're currently in that period.
No,
But it hasn't been sent until we approve it.
So we had an informal offer that took place. Again, we're just waiting on some title requirements, and then once those are complete, the formal offer will be pushed forward. And really, this is a ease of process sort of thing. You know, because of the appellate division decision, the city has to do this, right? We are, you know, we're at this point in the process. We've received the authorization, it's been checked and everything, but this is just to ensure in the unlikely event that the plaza owners immediately accept upon getting the letter that funding can easily be made, and we don't add liability to the city. And that's probably a future discussion in executive session, now that I'm thinking about it.
Okay, so 90 days clock will start ticking, anticipated in a few weeks. We will look to schedule as soon as possible and as soon as we can make sure all relevant parties can be involved. Anything additional? I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Okay.
Thank you.